Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. It's 5 years since the death of George Floyd rocked America and had all sorts of ramifications. That was 5 years ago. Today, we're going to talk about the state of civil rights in America with the head of the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. The co-host of this program, of course, is Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm excellent, and I'm very excited to be joined by Harmeet Dhillon. It's a little bit of a flashback in a positive way. I remember we were lucky enough to have Harmeet in our documentary, The Creepy Line, some time ago, and it's crazy to think that it's been 5 years since George Floyd, and now Harmeet goes from somebody who can talk about these things to actually be in the position to shape policy and fight back against things, I think, in favor and on behalf of the American people. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. So, Harmeet, I want to talk a little bit at the beginning just about the state of play at the Department of Justice, because when people think about the deep state, they tend to think about the Pentagon or the intelligence community or some of the stuff that DOJ is shaking up. But in a lot of respects, the legal deep state is exactly where you are, which is the Civil Rights Division. So tell us about what's going on, how you're trying to reform things institutionally at DOJ in light of the issue of civil rights.
Well, thank you for having me, both of you, and it's a pleasure to be here. When you think about the Department of Justice, you're right. You think, okay, well, the president won and the president gets to appoint the top people in the DOJ. And so that means the policy should flow from that. But the reality is that throughout the United States, there's thousands, tens of thousands of lawyers who've made their careers at the Department of Justice. And they don't change their viewpoints or their backgrounds necessarily when the administration changes. They should, because it is a president's prerogative to change and shift priorities, and the new attorney general gets to choose prosecution targets and what we're going to focus on. But there's a lot of resistance to that sometimes in the Department of Justice, and nowhere is that more true than at the Civil Rights Division, where historically lawyers have come to work if they have a particular political perspective. And it's I've been a civil rights lawyer my entire 32-year career, but it's from more of a neutral perspective, or a pro individual liberty perspective, and not sort of a collective Marxist perspective. And so there was quite a bit of resistance when we came here to the DOJ to actually following the orders that the president has laid down as his priorities. Now, we are going to enforce the same statutes. We enforce Americans with Disabilities Act and the Violence Against Women Act and the FACE Act and Title VII, Title VI, Title IX, these important discrimination statutes that we believe in. But our priorities are going to change because the administration has changed. So we've made our priorities tackling discrimination on college campuses, tackling DEI, making sure girls are safe in girls' private spaces and have the right to compete for sports as envisioned by Title IX. We are protecting people from the wave of anti-Semitism that has swept our country, whether it be in the streets of major cities or on college campuses. And, there's so many other priorities. We're tackling voting rights issues and religious land use issues and a whole host of issues. And this is really, I think, the first time, quite frankly, that a Republican administration has come in with an affirmative civil rights agenda, as opposed to just playing defense and trying to slow down the bad things that have been happening. I'm proud to be part of that. And so a part of that is, unfortunately, cleaning house when people don't want to go along with what we want to do. We're giving them the opportunity to pursue their careers elsewhere. And that has been some of the work that we've been doing to shake out the DOJ in my first several weeks here on the job.
And you've been, I think, quite candid about the number of people who have left. I know you shared with Tucker Carlson last week about them having crying sessions and just being in their feelings, as some would say. But I wrote a book in 2018 about election integrity, and we talked about how Tom Perez was in your previous position, and as the head of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, he was somebody who advocated for the expansion of non-citizen voting rights. And now you have somebody who represented President Trump in previous election battles. So you talk about like a total 180. Is there any part of you that empathizes with the staff? Like, wait, it was this and now it's this? Or is it, no, you're a professional, you get paid a big salary, you need to do the job, and if you're not, you're welcome to leave?
Look, our country was not founded on Marxist principles, and yet Marxism is actually the organizing principle of much of the left's tear down of our institutions historically. You see laws around the United States that I'm getting involved in or examining, getting involved in states like Colorado that are effectively taking away parental rights. Women made so much progress dating back to the suffrage movement in our country and equal rights, and those rights are being taken away. Boys are being given girls' trophies. These are all Marxist principles, and that's not in the Constitution. So I don't have any sympathy for that. You don't get to take a government salary and remake our government from the inside out and shred the norms that built this country and made it great. So I believe in those norms, and I believe in the Constitution, and I believe in the laws as passed by Congress. And it is not our job at the Department of Justice to make up new rights and tear down institutions. It's our job to protect those institutions, as the American people very decisively voted for in the last election.
Well, I love your emphasis on individual rights as opposed to group rights, because, of course, that is what it's all about. And a lot of people don't know you have a history of helping people protect their rights. I know after 9/11 attacks, for example, you were very, very supportive and helpful in protecting the civil liberties of people of the Sikh faith who were being somehow lumped in together with the 9/11 attackers, which was so totally absurd. So you understand the fact that individual civil liberties can be damaged by what government does or what but private citizens do. But you look at it from the standpoint of individuals. So I wanted to bring up a case in Minneapolis. This is something that Eric mentioned. Apparently, the Hennepin County attorney, Mary Moriarty, has issued a new policy asking her prosecutors to consider the racial identity of defendants as a corrective measure against unconscious bias in the justice system. Seems to me this is another example of focusing on a group category rather than the individual. Is that something that you're aware of? Is that something that you guys at DOJ are going to try to do something about, what she and probably other prosecutors are asking happen at the local level?
Yeah, we sent a letter to Mary Moriarty about 3 weeks ago demanding information about this policy, and we have opened up a formal investigation here in the Civil Rights Division about that. It's illegal to use race in sentencing. That's blatantly illegal in the United States, and so she's trying to hide behind a clever semantical dodge, which is, we're just asking for it to be considered as one of many factors. It cannot be one of the factors, and we've already heard from victims of crime who had the attacker be treated leniently presumably because of their race. And this is totally unconstitutional, and we won't stand for it at the DOJ. So we will go through the steps necessary and hopefully put an end to this policy.
Something else you're doing in the law enforcement area is the Biden administration, I think in the wake of the George Floyd case, wanted all this federal supervision of the local police departments in Minnesota. I think Louisville was another one. DOJ has kind of stepped back and said this really isn't necessary. Can you tell us what your thinking is on that and how you view the balance? I mean, it's a difficult issue, the balance between the civil liberties of defendants, but also the ability of police to simply do their job in a normal, legitimate way.
Well, look, I mean, I'm a lawyer who has, over the years, I've sued the police. The police are not perfect; they're not angels, but generally speaking, they have a very difficult job in our society. They put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe, and so I think they're entitled to a presumption of good faith and fair dealing. What consent decrees do, which is a tool that has been used for the last several decades, really since the Rodney King riots, so about a 3-decade long history of one cop or two cops doing something bad and indefensible, in addition to prosecuting that cop, which is something that we're going to continue to do and are doing here at the DOJ, we put the whole city in the penalty box. We make them pay tens of millions, sometimes over $200 million. The average consent decree, which is where a federal judge oversees a federal monitor who gets paid money by the city to monitor them, and then the city has upwards of $10 million a year compliance costs. Cops leave those departments because they don't want to spend their days doing ticky-tacky paperwork and not protecting people from crime. Crime goes up because the bad guys know that the cops' hands are tied in that city. And this is an immediate, sort of horror story for law-abiding citizens in these communities. In the news this week is the shambles that is Seattle, Washington. It's a shambles, and guess what? It's under a consent decree. It's been under a consent decree for over a decade now. Um, and ironically, the former Democrat mayor of the city was the U.S. attorney who kind of shoved this consent decree down the throat of the city. And when she became the mayor, she asked for it to be lifted. And now we're a couple of mayors later, and that consent decree means Antifa can run wild and harass and attack Christians simply trying to pray and protest in that city. And nothing happens. I mean, during COVID, we saw their whole little Chaz movement where there was effectively a no-go zone for the police. And guess what? The police don't want to work in a city where they can't do their jobs. So citizens are left vulnerable, and it is a recipe for disaster. So in the Department of Justice last week, what we did is we dismissed the consent decrees that the prior DOJ had filed literally weeks or days before the inauguration of the new president in Minneapolis and in Louisville, which in turn were 4-year investigations dating back to 2000 to the last Trump administration, where the prior Attorney General, William Barr, declined to put these cities under consent decrees. In each case, arguably, police officers had engaged in misconduct, arguably, I say, and they were prosecuted for that. And they are being prosecuted for that in Louisville. Two detectives obtained a no-knock search warrant, which is a disfavored law enforcement tactic that puts people at risk under false pretenses. They lied to get that, and they're being punished for prosecuting them. But we don't need to punish all the taxpayers and all the law-abiding citizens in those cities. What we also did is we withdrew 6 sets of factual findings that are sort of pre-consent decree predicates that DOJ uses, and they're frankly, they're gifts to plaintiffs' lawyers filing civil lawsuits because they cite these fake findings, or these, I should say fake, these infirm findings that the DOJ reached. And we don't have confidence. I, as a lawyer who has to sign my name when I go to court and say I have confidence, I don't have confidence in these findings. And so we are withdrawing those findings in half a dozen jurisdictions. And believe me, after I made those announcements on Wednesday last week, quite a few other attorneys general and prosecutors and law enforcement and elected officials in other states where there are existing consent decrees that come to us and asked us to examine those. Seattle is actually one where a lot of people in Washington have asked us to examine that, and there's some others. And I think it's just a scandal what's going on with consent decrees, a lot of wasted money, a lot of abusive conduct by monitors, judges who aren't doing their jobs correctly, and the citizens are the losers. So we're not doing that in this DOJ.
Harmeet, we have like 1,000 things we could talk to you about, including, I think, the reason for having you on, which is, the anniversary of George Floyd. What's the legacy there? But you did say the magic word, consent decrees. And just because this is obviously something you know quite a bit about, we actually did a report on consent decrees under Obama that came out about 10 years ago. But one of the things that we found was it's basically a sue and settle situation. They go after, in this case, big banks. And then what they do is they get the settlements, and they're allowed to direct the settlements to politically active leftist organizations. Is that something that you all have looked at? And is that another thing you're trying to claw back? Because it was basically a backdoor way of funding Democrat political operations under the guise of civil rights under the Obama DOJ.
Yeah, I mean, this has absolutely been left-wing rent seeking. And, some people on the right have suggested, okay, well, we should just do that for our side. No, it's wrong. It is wrong to take public resources and direct them to your buddies. That's wrong. That's corrupt. And so there are maybe instances in which, let's say, there's some gross misconduct going on at an American university or American city or something. And for a short period of time, we need some umpire to oversee it. Well, there needs to be an endpoint to it. There needs to be close monitoring by a judge. It needs to be a last resort where people can't be trusted to monitor themselves. What we have instead is the average city consent decree over police practices is over a decade. The average cost is over $200 million to the city to comply. The average monitor gets paid over $1 million average. So some of them are getting paid over 2 million. And guess what? When you're getting paid to administer a problem, the problem never seems to get solved. And so it's just basic human nature.
Yeah.
I'm not blaming people for acting in their own economic self-interest, but I am blaming the people who contribute to that. They've been sitting right here in my chair in the DOJ, and we are taking a different approach here. But there are bad cops. There are bad cops in every police department, and we should deal with those bad cops by prosecuting them, firing them, and making it unpleasant for them to be bad cops. That doesn't mean we should make every citizen unsafe.
You know, it's interesting, Harmeet, we are talking about the anniversary of the George Floyd death. There are a lot of people out there, I have not really looked at it in detail myself, who feel like there was a rush to judgment in that case, right? That the police officers were charged aggressively, some people say, maybe evidence was overlooked, whatever. Do you have any thoughts on that? And how do you, as a prosecutor, deal with the issue when you're prosecuting somebody, or as an attorney, you're defending somebody in a highly volatile situation like that? It seems like there was a lot of pressure for prosecutors in the city to sort of throw the book at the cops. But what's your thought on the case? Is that a case that should be reopened, or do you think that justice was done?
So first of all, it's important for your viewers to know there were actually two prosecutions in the George Floyd situation, two sets of prosecutions. One was at the state level and one was at the federal level. Now, at the state level, I think it has been well reported that George Floyd he was not a saint. He had a significant amount of drugs in his system, and he had been taking a lot of drugs for a long period of time, and his heart was in a weakened condition. Is it a great police practice for a cop to kneel on someone's neck for 9 minutes? I think that's excessive force. And I think that's, well established as well. But, then you get into causation. Did that, cause the death, or did something else cause the death? I wasn't there. I didn't try those cases. But it's important to know that the federal prosecution is actually against Derek Chauvin concerns some different issues. And so it isn't just what happened in the George Floyd situation, but it's other conduct. And sitting here in the Department of Justice, I'm not going to throw shade on our prosecution. That is now, I think there were two guilty pleas in those cases, and that is in the hands of people above my pay grade to handle. But it is correct that there's a rush to judgment, and you see the ridiculous lionization of George Floyd as some kind of a saint. He wasn't a saint. And the fact that his unfortunate death was used as a predicate for all kinds of looting and violence and misconduct that was unpunished by the police. And now the police's hands have been tied. They've been under investigation. By the way, even though the Department of Justice is walking away from the consent decree that was negotiated because we don't think it's necessary or productive, the city already agreed to a consent decree at the state level with the Human Resources Commission, or Human Rights Commission, I should say, in Minnesota. They're already doing that. They're already punishing the people of Minneapolis anyway. We don't need to double down on that. Louisville, similarly, is a very unfortunate situation. Breonna Taylor lost her life because she was with a boyfriend who shot back when the police executed a no-knock warrant that they shouldn't have gotten in the first place. We're prosecuting the cops who did that. But, again, there are a lot of different conflating factors in those cases. And again, the city of Louisville is voluntarily reforming its police practices. It's already decided, without the DOJ forcing them to stop this practice of no-knock warrants. They are dangerous. When people are not given notice and they have a weapon, which they have a right to do in America for the most part, sometimes they fire back and people die. It's dangerous, and we want to avoid dangerous situations as much as possible. So there are better and there are worse police practices. I've been trying to publicize the fact that the DOJ has tools for law enforcement. We do voluntary audits. If a law enforcement agency wants to know, are they up to date? Can they do better? We will help you with that at the DOJ. We have a program called COPS, Community-Oriented Policing Services, and we help police departments or sheriff's departments or what have you make sure that they have the best practices. Sometimes we even give grants to help them with that. So the COPS program basically allows people, before they get into a consent decree situation, to audit whether they're performing the best practices in their police department, even get some grants for that. And we prefer to be in a proactive setting where the police have a good relationship with the community, and there's no perfect system. But I don't know about you, but I definitely rely on law enforcement to help keep me safe. I've had to call the police, and we want police to feel empowered and able to assist citizens. And then I think we have targeted tools at the DOJ to attack wrongdoing by rogue law enforcement. And the DOJ is not the first place people should go anyway. There's local law enforcement that handles these issues as well. And so I think that's the appropriate place for most law enforcement misconduct.
Harmeet, I love that the way you approach these issues is so, I think, fact-based and sober-minded. You can hold the idea that some law enforcement officers might behave badly and suffer and face a consequence because of that without drawing this much larger and inaccurate kind of conclusion about what it means as that culture or society at large. And I think that that's something that we sort of lost the ability to do 5 years ago. The summer of 2020 was insane. There was COVID happening. You had health officials come out and say it was okay to protest against racism, where the months before that you hadn't been allowed to leave your home. Tim Walz issued a statement just on Memorial Day, and his statement on Memorial Day was 50 words for the legacy and the sacrifice of fallen soldiers. His statement on the anniversary of George Floyd's death was 172 words, and he talked about, they wish that the legacy will continue on. I guess as you reflect back on that summer, what is your big takeaway from what that moment in American history sort of did and what it means today?
Look, I'm still angry about what happened during COVID, and 2020 was a epochal shift in our civil rights movement. I will say most conservatives did not care much about civil rights because it wasn't affecting them. It was affecting some other people, and suddenly it affected everybody in our country, and people got it. So I went to court during COVID to allow people who were running for office to be able to do their campaigning or to protest. People wanted to protest in Sacramento, California against the governor's shutdowns. They were threatened with arrest for doing that. People wanted to protest. Clients of mine wanted to protest the fact that the state of California was slow rolling gun applications and permits and training. They weren't allowed to protest. Same summer, people were allowed to protest nationwide. 100,000 people were allowed to march in Los Angeles, California, at the same time that it was illegal for anybody to do it, but they weren't arrested for that because the purpose was supposedly a beneficial one. Well, guess what? If you believe in science and you believe that there was a contagious virus that was going to kill all of us, viruses are insensitive to political policies and political protests. But of course, neither of those things were true. Neither was there a virus that was going to kill us all if we congregated. That was a lie peddled by our government, unfortunately, and Dr. Fauci, who hasn't faced any consequences for that. And most of those cases failed. I did win several cases at the Supreme Court, both myself and my nonprofit, on the narrow issue of religious liberty. But it was a time that businesses were shut down, careers were destroyed, educational opportunity was permanently taken away from people who will never get that back because they'll never be teenagers again. And nobody's paying the price for that. So I hope in this civil rights division to be able to continue to alert people to the risks of these violations. And every opportunity I get, members of Congress shake my hand and they say, "What can we do, Harmeet?" Like, no one ever asks you to expects you to actually respond to that. But I do have a laundry list of things they can do. And what they can do is overrule that Supreme Court precedent, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, that allowed judge after judge and governor after governor, Republican and Democrat, to strip away our civil rights, kill our elderly, rob our youth of educational opportunity, shut down our businesses, and generally lie to people. And so we should never forget that. And it was fairly recent. People have moved on. I haven't moved on.
Harmeet, let me ask you finally on the issue of anti-Semitism. It's frankly shocking to me that these institutions of higher learning, Ivy League, but also elsewhere, are so resistant to fighting anti-Semitism, allowing Jewish students to openly speak. Why do you think that is? Is it the money from the Middle East? Is it the issue of Israel? Why is it that these institutions of higher learning have to be dragged kicking and screaming to protect the civil liberties and the First Amendment speech rights of their Jewish students?
So it's a confluence of at least two factors. The first factor is generalized Marxism happening on college campuses. And then you have a weaponized, shiftless militia of Marxists who adapt to the cause du jour. The same people were protesting Occupy Wall Street. They shifted into Black Lives Matter. They shifted into Antifa. And today, literally the same people are wrapping their costume of a keffiyeh and their slogans that are pre-printed from the river to the sea and their signs and their flags. the same people are adopting to the latest Marxist cause and any cause to destabilize the Western societies and our campuses. And guess what? The most fertile ground for that is idealistic college students who are absolute suckers and patsies for the latest movement, whatever it is. And college, it was something different when I was in college, and today it's this. It's the same people, same tone. But call it a fire with an accelerant. Call it arson on our campuses, and the accelerant is foreign money, and it isn't just Middle Eastern money. I believe. I think they're probably destabilizing forces that are enemies of our country that are sending their money from their governments to destabilize our country, and we are allowing that to happen. And so the same know your customer rules that apply to you and me when we go to buy a house or have to spend our own money and the bank is giving us the third degree. Guess what? The bank is not giving the third degree to American universities. They're not complying with the same rules. Why is that? That's a very good question. So I think we need to really get to the bottom of these issues and stop humoring Marxism and anti-Americanism on our college campuses. These police need to have their hands untied. Domestic terrorists in our country, in the form of movements like Antifa, they need to be arrested and stopped. And we need to just have a zero tolerance policy for any American citizen or legal resident of this country to feel unsafe in our streets, on our campuses, on their way to their synagogues. It's un-American to allow that. And on our watch in the DOJ and Civil Rights Division and under the leadership of our president and our attorney general, there is zero tolerance for that. I meet daily with rabbis and students on campuses and the parents who are affected. We have seen their tears. We have stood beside them, and we will not tolerate it in America because this is exactly how the Holocaust started. It started with Jews being marginalized from society and being told they couldn't get education as lawyers and doctors, and then they were ghettoized, and then they were sent to camps. Not on our watch, not in America today.
Harmeet, my last question is, I want people to understand, I think, how challenging your job is. And because seriously, you've seen all the talk about the Biden auto pen, and people would ask me, like, who's running the country? And I would say, I think it's the lawyers at the Department of Justice that got staffed in during the Obama years, and they've kind of stayed there. And so you're sitting there now, you talk about like a fundamental sea change of, some of them have left, but a lot of them haven't. As you noted, there's still a lot of people there. And I guess my question, Harmeet, is like, you've got this incredibly challenging task. Do you admit to yourself how hard it is? And number two, you've been a Republican in San Francisco. You've been open about the challenges of losing a spouse. Like, is it as hard as you thought it would be, or just how's it going?
Well, look, I'm only responsible for my section, and it's a big section. It's an important section of the Department of Justice. The president asked me to do this job. It has not been easy. Not a single hour of this job has been easy so far. It has been a struggle internally and externally. There's criticism from Republicans for our priorities. There's criticism certainly from the left, and United States senators criticize every move that we make. But what I have done it was day 8 after finishing my training and, getting my HR paperwork in and looking at my, reduced circumstances of my paycheck. I made it very clear to all the 400 plus lawyers who worked in the Civil Rights Division that what time it is. Okay. And what time it is President Trump won this election. President Trump has executive orders, and within the framework of the civil rights laws that we enforce, our priorities are going to change. I put that in writing. I made it very clear. And over 200 of them chose to take buyout offers and leave the government. So we are down by over 50% here in the Civil Rights Division. We are pressing for the opportunity, and we are obviously also going through DOJ, and part of that buyout process is those lawyers who left are still on the books. So, I'm pleading with my supervisors and people in the White House to allow us to hire more people, and we're starting that process now. We are hiring back, and at the end of the day, this is going to be a historic opportunity for lawyers who believe in the future of this country, a bright, positive future of this country, don't hate America, to come in and help us in the DOJ protect our civil rights and our civil liberties on an individual basis, as the founders of this country envision and as our president has promised. It's exciting, actually. So if we get the chance to do that, I'm very hopeful about the positive change that we can affect. Even with the reduced staff that we have right now, every single day, we're opening up investigations, we're filing lawsuits, we're sending letters. I got to tell, someone in a state that were filing a lawsuit on voting issues today in their state. That's exciting, and people have been waiting for the cavalry to come. Well, the cavalry is here. We are hiring reinforcements, and while it is a huge challenge, perhaps the most challenging job in my career, the possibilities are tremendous, and we have no choice, guys. We have to win this. We have to execute and execute well. I think our country was literally on the brink of being lost at this last election, and it doesn't solve the problems. Don't solve themselves. We have to solve them actively. There's pain involved in that. There's choices involved in that, and there's willpower involved in that. I, for one, have it. The people around me have it. This DOJ has it, and we have a firm conviction to deliver for the American people.
Well, it was once said about Washington, D.C., there are smart people and there are fearless people, but there are rarely people that have both of those qualities. You have both of those qualities, Harmeet. We thank you very much for taking the time to join us, and we wish you the best in your battles ahead. And we also appreciate the audience taking the time to listen to this podcast. Until next time, thank you.